Welcome to the Insight Roundtable. Today, we're going to focus on legal issues in the venture capital space and how venture capital firms think about these legal issues, both from an investment perspective and a risk perspective. And we're lucky to have two phenomenal folks with different views and experiences here today. First, we've got Scott Birnbaum, who give a bit of background here. After growing up in Paris, moved to the United States, went to Georgetown, went to law school, practiced at a big law firm for several years doing corporate law, and then ultimately became a venture capitalist and founded Red Sea Ventures, which is an early stage venture capital firm based in New York that's invested in a number of really successful companies, including Allbird, Sweetgreen, Casetext, now a bunch of others. And so while not a practicing lawyer anymore, he certainly, and we'll talk about this, brings his legal experience to the business and the investment side. So we're happy to have you here. And then we also have Liz Federowicz, who is the general counsel of Expa, which is a California-based venture capital fund and startup studio that was founded by Garrett Camp, one of the co-founders of Uber in 2013. They've invested in a number of successful companies and have also worked with founders to create and launch a number of different companies that have gone on to have a lot of success. And before joining Expa, among other things, Liz was a corporate counsel at Federowicz West for a number of years, and then became Expa's GC in September of 2020, right in the middle of the COVID madness. So I'm sure that was quite an experience. So hopefully I didn't get any of that wrong, but if I did, you can tell me. But welcome to both of you guys. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
So I gave some high-level background on both of you, but it'd be great to hear just at a high level, if you would, kind of what your roles are at a day-to-day basis at your firms and how you find yourself using your legal background and skills, both as a partner at a fund, Scott, and as the general counsel at a fund, Liz. So Scott, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So from a day-to-day role perspective, I'm the founder and managing partner of the firm. In fact, I'm the sole partner of the firm. So I kind of have to do a little bit of everything from fundraising, investor relations, obviously sourcing deals, diligencing them, managing the team that we have on the investment side, as well as on the operations and portfolio support side. So it's just a role that sort of cuts across all aspects of the firm. And inevitably also, obviously, touching on legal issues, although I rely on outside counsel for almost everything that we do. The fact that I do have a legal background helps me sift through it a little bit quicker, be a little bit more efficient than I might otherwise be, I think, at handling some of those matters, both more effectively from a cost perspective, as well from a speed to resolution perspective. So the day-to-day for me is really super varied. Thankfully, I have a good team of people, a great team of people that work with us that help, operate across different functional areas of our firm and firm management. And so I get to obviously be both an individual contributor, handling a lot of things myself, as well as getting to mentor, support, coach, and manage other team members.
Seems great. And Liz, I'm curious about how involved you are in your GC role in the investment making process versus spending your time on other issues that relate internally at Expa. What's kind of your day-to-day like?
Sure. Steve, my day-to-day is a little of everything all the time. I enjoy being a Jill of all trades. Investment side, when that is up and running, at full speed ahead, like it was in 2021, I'm very involved in the deals. Studio side, as you mentioned, we build companies internally. So everything from ideating and pre-diligencing companies, issue spotting at a very early stage when we have, a host of 20 ideas that we might get launched, to actually getting things up and running with the lead partner for that investment and the ops team when we do proceed with a new company. And we're doing a lot of that now. So my focus lately has been a lot on the studio side. It's been a lot of fun. As you mentioned, my background at Federowicz West, I was working both on the company side and the investor side. And I found that coming to Expa, I could bring that to bear and really continue to do a little bit of both.
That's great. And do you find yourself getting really in the weeds on a number of different kinds of legal issues every single day? I'm guessing that these different companies have very different issues.
Yeah, it's it's a lot of fun. I mean, I feel like an issue spotting maniac at times, and it's a question of identifying risks and discussing them with the business team, figuring out if these are now or later risks, and working with some awesome outside counsel to help advise us, because I'm really a legal team of one on the inside.
Yeah. So that's great. I think people will find it fascinating to hear what those jobs are like, because people really generally, I don't think, know what goes on internally at places. So next, it'd be great to talk about, we're going to talk plenty about AI, which is obviously a really keen area of interest, both in the law, but in the venture capital space, where it's just kind of become, at least public facing, the hottest area of investment. But starting now with kind of the non-AI portion of this, on the legal issues that face venture capital funds, Liz, first, maybe other than AI, I mean, which I want to get to, what are some of the key legal issues that you find yourselves dealing with in the GC seat from that perspective, and how many relate to kind of what's going on internally at the company versus the studio business? And are there some examples of specific issues where, your lens of looking at an issue as a lawyer has changed how the company is going to view an investment or a company that they want to get off the ground?
Sure. I'd say in terms of, bringing to bear what I can do internally in the diligence process, I'm sort of the, second rung of diligence after the business team has done it. If I identify some key risks, we might elevate that and consult with outside counsel. Couple of investments that we've done have had some regulatory risks that were, not in my wheelhouse, and certainly warranted a closer look. We did identify a couple that had some cap table issues, and certainly that informs the way that we write the term sheet if we're leading, or if we will agree to go ahead with an investment. I'd say on the investment side, I don't want to get into too many particulars, but that's kind of where I would value add in a general way. And then on the company formation side in our venture studio, I'm part of the process in ideating and identifying the white space that we might have in the market, and whether there's a reason that this company has not been started so far. Bringing in, some subject matter experts, as I am actually right now with one nascent company that seems quite exciting, and we're just diligencing a little bit more. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. And I mean, when you're thinking about bringing in outside counsel on some of these issues, what is it that you look for? Any specific things that people in the audience might find helpful to know, like the things you really want to see, things that you like, things that you don't like?
Sure. I love going to the subject matter experts. If we identify, that this person is the top crypto lawyer, and we happen to not be working with that firm already, we might seek their counsel if we're considering an investment in a new way. If we do engage on a more philosophical level, usually going straight to a partner, asking them to work on it and to give us their time, understanding that their time is going to be more expensive than an associate at that firm, but usually it's much more valuable. And you don't have some extra time spent in wheels turning. So we've got a couple of those folks on our roster, always looking to identify and meet new ones around the legal landscape. So just knowing who's out there and continuing to form my network is really helpful.
That's great. And Scott, when you're thinking about making investments in companies, how do you think about legal and regulatory risks that you're seeing and how they may affect investments? And obviously you can't know what the future is going to bring, but I assume that can be an important issue, even forgetting AI for the moment. in how you think about making investments, and then how you manage dealing with those companies as they move forward.
Yeah, look, so I mean, not every company has regulatory risk, but sometimes the companies with the largest potential outcome do have a considerable amount of potential regulatory risk. I'm thinking back to Uber, which sadly was not one of our investments. It a little predated my the beginning of my firm by a couple of years. But that was a company that I know when they went out to raise the seed round, there were a lot of firms that turned it down because of regulatory risk. And that's a little hat tip to Garrett, the founder of Expa, obviously, who saw that and believed that they were going to be able to cut through that regulatory risk. And the firms that declined the investment because of that risk missed out on a generational business. And so I think it's important to identify it, but then I think you've got to reason from a first principles perspective and figure out what the business level interests are, and believe that ultimately, while the market may not be perfectly efficient from a regulatory and policy perspective, it will trend towards progress. And if the timing is right and the interests are sufficiently aligned, and the and the business is proposing a positive, an outcome that can be positive for a large number of stakeholders, then then in some cases you can get comfortable taking that risk in the face of the sort of unknown of the evolving regulatory landscape. So that's sort of the unknowns. Then there's the knowns, which is a really exciting area to be tracking, because there are changes to regulation, and a number of them that have happened recently that change the landscape of what's possible to be done. There are some regulatory moats that were created around certain industries that made it impossible to get access to data, for example. And so, to not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but with respect to AI, one of the big differentiators is access to data. And so if the regulators mandate that data become more open, like is the case now happening across the healthcare industry, there's a number of regulations that are changing and are forcing insurers and others to open up APIs to give automated access to data, obviously subject to HIPAA compliance, et cetera. But it's going to give access to data that was previously completely closed, and so that creates an opportunity to basically form an entire new industry that previously couldn't exist. And so, being able to keep an eye towards those facts, anticipate them, knowing when legislation is coming to maturity and how that's going to, and trying to anticipate how it's going to impact an industry, creates new opportunities for investment and new businesses to be built. And we're eager to do that, where we can, and it aligns with our thesis. But again, I think it's always a first principles question. You don't let regulation stand in the way of investing in a business at the seed stage, because this is a 10+ year time horizon, and our entire industry is built around disruption. And so, it's inevitable that if a regulation is antiquated or counterproductive to the economy, that or to its population, at some point, that regulation can and will be changed. And sometimes it needs to be nudged along, and sometimes it'll just sort of naturally happen, and you need to just time it appropriately.
Yeah, those are some really interesting points. Just to unpack one of them, it'd be interesting to hear, what is your overall approach to decision making regarding investing in companies at the seed stage, and how that might differ from how a later stage investor might look at it?
Well, later stage investors largely looking at attraction. They are obviously there are always areas that need to be de-risked at various stages of investment, certainly on the venture capital life cycle. But the difference between what we do and what Expa does, certainly with their studio model, and we do a little bit of incubation too, but certainly even at the seed stage investment level, you're really betting on a team, you're betting on a market that either exists or you believe will exist for a variety of different reasons, such as the regulatory landscape changing, as we just talked about. There are other reasons that markets can evolve, and it's trying to sort of anticipate how that's going to happen, why it's going to happen, and determining whether that market will be large enough to support the returns that we look for in our investments, and whether that team is really the right team to build that and pivot through, directional changes that they may need to make in response to evolving market landscapes. And so, the vast majority of our time is really spent on those two dimensions. It's getting to know the founders and understanding them, and it's trying to imagine, where the market is going, and hoping that those two sort of conspire to, in the Venn diagram, in that middle overlap turns into, a billion or multi-billion-dollar business.
And starting with you, Liz, I mean, when you have portfolio company, you make investments and they're moving forward, and then something happens. Something comes up that relates to some legal issue for one of those companies. How involved, if at all, at the VC fund stage do you end up getting in those issues?
Certainly, for our studio companies that we are still incubating internally, I will get involved. I may actually specifically contract as legal counsel with those studio companies if my level of involvement gets up to a certain stage where it is important that I be named as their attorney and understood as their attorney, not just Expa's attorney. And in that case, I will work very closely with them, sort of as a middleman to interpret what they are hearing from their outside counsel typically, and working with the in-house team, engineers, developers and product to really implement what they're hearing. And for the portfolio companies that are outside of our studio, I am very friendly with a lot of their counsel and general counsel, if they're big enough to have general counsel. It's sort of the number one thing that, I can help with is to advise and steer them to other counsel if they're not getting great legal advice in their current situation. So always keeping myself apprised of, what their legal needs might be and who might be the right people out in the universe that could better advise them. Certainly a key point of diligence on the way in is, who are your lawyers and how often do you talk to them? So that's kind of the level at which I would get involved there, but much more on the studio side.
Yeah. And Scott, how about you?
So, I think what I'd say is I try to help founders issue spot. We have a lot of high frequency interactions with the founders within our portfolio. And so as a result of that, I end up hearing a sort of off the cuff comment in a board meeting or in a one-off discussion where they mention something that may not even have tripped any alarm bells for them, but for me, make me say, oh, wait, there's, it's the issue spotting thing that you learned in law school very early on. And so when you hear that, then I sort of like quickly will jump in and say, hey, have you thought about the following? Are you thinking about it through this angle? Sometimes they'll say, yes, absolutely. We've thought about it and we've discussed it with our attorneys and we feel comfortable with XYZ. And in other cases, they'll say, oh my God, I never even thought about that possible issue. How do I learn more about that? And then my job is to try to direct them towards, experts that we know that are appropriately sort of tailored for their needs, both from a subject matter expertise perspective, from an availability perspective, from a seniority perspective, or a cost perspective, or otherwise. And sometimes it doesn't lead to anything. Sometimes it just is a little bit of a conversation that is an opportunity for me to, help raise awareness around an issue for the founder so that they've got it in the back of their head so that they can do the issue spotting down the road. I'm not certainly not a I was, I didn't practice for long enough to be an expert in any area of the law, but I've sort of seen enough across our portfolio, across my career as a lawyer and as a business person, that I sort of have a rough sense of where the big issues lie across a lot of different areas of business building. And so, bringing that experience to bear to help a founder who's a first-time founder, very young, in some cases has never had a job before, before building this business, or has only worked for a couple of years, trying to accelerate their experience through mine is a really fulfilling piece of the job for me.
That's great. So now let's get into AI, which obviously has become the hottest topic since ChatGPT launched, and has, from what I read on the front page of the Financial Times and other places, is the place where venture capital money and other types of money is flowing like crazy. And people obviously have incredibly divergent views on whether AI is going to be something that is good for humanity, amazing for humanity, bad, or the end of all human existence. So there's a pretty broad range out there. And I know, both of your companies are involved in considering investing in companies that are in the AI space. And probably not just companies that are specific in the AI space. I think we all kind of see that almost any company is going to be affected in some way by AI, right? I mean, I'm a partner at a law firm. A law firm isn't an AI company, but on the other hand, AI is going to have deep implications for the practice of law and what clients expect and what we can do, and, for better and for worse as we think about these things. So one question I have just as an initial one, given that this is such an area of growth, but is such an area where there is so little law, right? There are copyright issues that are floating out there a ton, right? The IP issues of who owns what, and can a large language model be, actually take into account other certain IP. There's data and privacy issues about what's being swept into this. And, if someone can put on ChatGPT, hey, where does this girl go to school and what's her address? And it pops up. What are the implications of that? And then there's so much more out there of just Congress is starting to have hearings. Global regulators are starting to think about this. And certainly they seem to be moving in a way that is dramatically faster than they did for social media. Right? In the social media age, it kind of felt like they waited about 10 years and then decided to start getting involved. And now they're moving quick. And the other big difference, it seems to me, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is that whereas kind of the social media companies, at least public facing, seem to be saying, there's nothing to look at here, there's really no problem, leave us alone. The kind of public face of this issue now, whether it's Sam Altman or others, seem to be saying, yeah, you should get in here. Please do regulate. In fact, you'd better get involved with it now. So given that uncertainty, one question I have for both of you, and Liz, I'll start with you on this. Who helps you keep up to speed with all the various issues that are coming up that could affect investments, both that you have made and that the company is considering making, because it's just so rapidly changing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Steve, there are a lot of evolving resources out there right now for lawyers around AI, and it would behoove all of us to get our heads out of the sand and pay attention, because, as you said, our profession is changing under our feet, as is the world around us, and all of the companies that venture funds like Expa invest in. They are all evolving and implementing or considering implementing AI in some fashion right now. There are just manifold webinars that I try to send my team, and they say, oh my God, an hour listening to lawyers talk about AI. Like, my God, I'm not going to listen to that. What is the upshot of this? But on the legal side, I think all of us should be, staying abreast of these issues and attending as many CLEs around this, talking to our peers, not hiding from the fact that our companies are using AI, how are, and comparing notes with each other. I've actually increased my attendance at networking events, specifically around this issue, talking to everyone I can to understand who are the experts, should issues arise, and getting deep dives from those who are integrating it the most in their own products, and additionally thinking about how it can be my superpower as a lawyer as well. I'm a team of one, and anything that I can add to my toolkit to make me smarter and faster is good for me. I realize that may not be true across the board. Very curious to see what happens to new lawyers, law students, what they will do to add this to their own quivers. But I think certainly, in terms of getting advice, there's plenty going around, even though we are in a very evolving landscape. It's interesting for me too, the timing, of increased interest in AI and ChatGPT. It followed very closely on the heels of the SVB collapse. And at that moment, and I know Signature Bank was more the East Coast New York thing, but for us, very much in Silicon Valley, so the SVB bank collapse was big. folks circled up and were sharing and comparing notes, on open spreadsheets during that time. And that seemed to like carry forward to what we're doing now with AI and talking a little bit more freely and openly to help each other grapple with these issues all together.
That's interesting. Yeah, Scott, what do you think about that? What are kind of the ways that you try to keep up with what's going on as you try to evaluate whether you want to invest in a company in this space?
I mean, I'm not attending CLEs, unfortunately, although I think they are super valuable and interesting content to be absorbing. But I read a lot, speak to a lot of other funds, speak to attorneys at different law firms to hear what their practice groups are working on and who within those firms is, publishing any research or any papers, notes related to AI. And try to consume that content. And then really once we see a company that we sort of identified as interesting, if it incorporates AI related legal issues, certainly, then we'll try to sort of issue spot again and reach out to the experts in order to get advice from them as a part of the underwriting process. So, in my case, it's I think maybe a little bit similar to what Liz was saying, is it's about identifying the resources, the experts that you can go to when it comes time to really dive deeper into a specific issue.
What are some of the best AI tools in the legal space that you guys have seen that you think are already having an impact or may have an impact? Scott, let's start with you.
Well, we have a portfolio company called Case Text that you mentioned at the top of this that we invested in at the seed stage almost 10 years ago, and I think that it was just announced yesterday. I think that they were being acquired by Thomson Reuters and will be incorporated into Westlaw, and I think that's a really powerful tool. It's something that I've been thinking about since I was an attorney. That the combination of better search, lower cost access to better digital data, and then combined with artificial intelligence could potentially produce a really powerful value additive tool in the process of serving clients' interests. Specifically when I was a lawyer at a big firm, we had, obviously, as most large firms do, large staff of researchers and legal libraries and people who could help you do research on particular topics, in addition to having access to Lexis and Westlaw. And the idea that small firms, solo practitioners who need to service clients who are, who can't necessarily afford big law firm fees, are underserved because of the fact that their practitioners are under-resourced in terms of being able to, do the same level of research. And that's very hard for small business owners. And so the idea of supercharging those smaller firms, those less resourced firms with technology tools, including AI, felt like a really compelling place to sort of build some value additive impact to the economy, to people's lives, to practitioners, small business owners, et cetera. And so, that's one example that for us was sort of a long held thesis and fingers crossed played out. And that's sort of a theme that for us is a really big theme, not just in legal tech, but across all sort of small business enablement and consumer enablement, is how do you leverage technology to give people more time, more sophistication, sort of the tools of sophistication and efficiency that you could previously only get inside a very large organization.
And Liz, how about you?
Well, I will echo the applause to Case Text. Good job with that investment. I love seeing that exit. I'm a customer and I do use it. When I get errant questions on a phone call that are totally outside of my area of expertise, I could use that tool pretty quickly to get a general sense of the landscape, because that is an AI that is trained specifically on a corpus of legal data, not just ChatGPT scouring the internet and potentially hallucinating. So I like that one personally. There are some more venture capital focused evolving tools that I think more of us may be using in the future. I know that all of the major law firms like Latham are also implementing and thinking about and may have been using some sort of AI functionality already for years to ease in the drafting process, from incorporation to spotting defined terms so that you capitalize things appropriately. I love that one. I think Latera rolled that one out while I was still at the law firm. To Harvey AI, which is I think famously pretty well funded and rolled out to some of the law firms. I know that Kira AI, Link Square, Spot Draft, Ironclad, all are using AI in some fashion and advertising that and pitching me daily. So interested to see what other tools might become available. I think we're only getting started.
Are there any types of, what are the types of legal or regulatory changes that kind of most concern you when you think about AI and where this goes? Obviously, there are people that have been outspoken, like Mark Andreessen and others, about the risks of kind of over regulation in this space, and that that there might be a tendency to want to do more, but that could basically drive things offshore, which kind of sounds similar to some of the debate that there's been over cryptocurrency regulation in the United States. And crypto is obviously another big area of investment from venture capital funds and other types of funds that then has still in the middle kind of a whole mess of what the regulations are going to look like and what the laws are going to be. And kind of a battle between people that think, it should be more hands-off because the alternative is it's just going to go outside the US and we're going to lose our founders and lose our great businesses. And people who think that, there's deep risk to the country and we just need to do something. So I don't know, Scott, are there particular risks that you think about in this space that worry you when you think about the investments that you are making and want to make?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different, I think AI is not a monolith. I think where the public discourse around AI is a little bit difficult to have sometimes because we treat it as if it's one thing, and it's really a lot of different things, and it's very application specific. It's sort of like saying, a little bit different, but it's sort of like saying, should mobile be regulated? Should the internet be regulated? Like, yes, of course, all those things should be regulated. There needs to be regulations. The question is the level of risk involved varies greatly depending on the application of that tool, of that platform. And so I think from a societal perspective, the thing that I most worry about, obviously, one is the impact on the economy or the impact on the labor market and how that will ultimately impact the economy, and how we manage the transition, depending on how fast and furious that transition will be as a result of the introduction of AI across a lot of different industries. How do we manage a sort of a humane transition to make sure that people get retooled and can continue to leverage this technology rather than be replaced by it? So I think that's something that regulators need to figure out in order to ensure an orderly transition towards a new technological era. And I don't know what the timeline of that looks like. I don't think anybody really knows what the timeline looks like for that, but it's certainly something that I think they need to keep a really keen eye to, because the power of the technology is such that transition may happen a lot faster than we think it will, than it feels like it will. Right? Sort of like the Moore's Law exponential curve thing happening, but now applied to the disruption to the employment market. And so I think that's really important. There are areas where you apply AI to do things that humans cannot do, because the human mind and the physical limitations of the human body, the human eye, etc., make it really difficult to identify patterns or information, or identify a precancerous tumor on radio imaging, a mammogram or otherwise. And so those are really interesting and fantastic ways, I think, to apply that technology, that augment human capacity in a really meaningful way and are not replacing human capacity necessarily. And then I think that the big question for me is the societal damage, where you can see people who are, I think this is sort of the knock on social media, is that you create these echo chambers of information where people only continue to hear increasingly extreme and reinforcing messages, because that's what the algorithm is designed to feed them. Well, now the algorithm may not even be reinforcing messages from your network or your community. It may be just the reinforcing message of the AI, which, it's not totally clear to all of us yet exactly what algorithms are driving that information, who's pulling the levers on those algorithms, and so there's not there's transparency because a lot of it is open, but there's not a lot of transparency because a lot of it is not yet well understood. So that's the thing that worries me the most, is how it's going to influence sort of mass culture, mass thinking, societal cohesion. And I don't know the answer from a regulatory perspective, but I think, there are much smarter people out there that for whom, this is their job at think tanks and policy in academia, et cetera, that need to be spending a lot of time for it and need the support of industry in order to make sure that they're properly resourced to figure that out for all of us, for all of our benefits.
I mean, and when you're getting pitches, on a daily basis by companies that are in the AI space, thinking they're gonna revolutionize X space, Y space, Z space, whatever it is, do you think about those issues that you just mentioned in deciding whether or not to make those investments?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Because first of all, from trying to be a good steward of capital, and my one of my ambitions in running a venture capital fund is being able to invest in technology that's going to be value additive to the world and mostly to the people that live in it. We try to not invest in companies that we can anticipate are going to have real negative effects. Obviously, you can't always anticipate what the effects will be, but we try to anticipate them, and we try to avoid investing in businesses that we think are going to have negative effects on society. So we definitely think about it from that perspective. But even if you take that sort of, that piece out of it, ultimately, if something is doing something bad to society, you should expect that society will regulate it out of existence. Now, that's not always the case, because it's a balancing act between how bad it is and how much liberty you should give people, to do bad things to themselves. But over the long arc of history, that tends to be the way that it goes. And then the question is, how much time do you have to get there, or get out of that investment, if you're looking at it purely from a transactional perspective? And I think in a world where things are increasingly fast to change, I'm not so sure that I would be, if I were purely looking at this from an economic output perspective, I'm not sure that I would be making the bet that regulators and consumers are going to stay numb to the negative effects of some of these platforms, in a way that allows you to get your cash out of those businesses fast enough. So we think about it from all those angles.
And Liz, how do you think about these types of regulatory and legal changes, and what are the ones that most concern you in your capacity as GC at Expa?
Yeah, Scott touched on a lot of great points here. I'll echo some of them. But from my perspective, really thinking about how my team is using AI and how people around me are doing that as well can inform the risks that we're looking out for on the investment side and on the company building side.
And how are you using it? I'd be interested to know how. You mentioned that you were using case text before for certain legal questions that come up. Yeah. Are there other AI tools that your team are using that you found valuable?
Yes, there is one in the venture capital space that we're looking at. I think I won't say more there, but I'm also, a subscriber of GPT Premium or Pro, whatever it's called, GPT-4, the one where you pay a little bit and you can select that they do not use your data to build the model. Certainly using that. And, frankly, as all of these tools, come up and I hear about them, I'm reading the terms of service and privacy policies with far greater detail, admittedly, than seemed to be needed in the past. And, we've gridded out a lot of the AI tools and, what they say that they will do with your data, and whether you will own the output of those platforms after it, ingests your data and gives you something back. And a lot of them, really don't provide all of the bells and whistles that I'd be looking for from a consumer or enterprise standpoint at this point. especially all the new tools. I know that the sort of Azure and Bard and OpenAI, just GPT-4 can provide some level of protection. But every hour I hear about a new one. This one will transcribe our conversations on Zoom, but you read the terms of service, and who can they share your conversations on Zoom with? Have you just lost all confidentiality potentially down the line? And I think we will see these things play out in an increasing way. So that on the usage side is kind of what I look out for. And then on the investment side, if we are making an AI investment, could regulations come to bear, as Scott alluded to, that probably will limit a company's ability to continue using customer data in the way that they assume they can do. Are they implementing privacy controls? And we're seeing, I think, that the EU will come out with an Artificial Intelligence Act potentially sooner than anything will mobilize in the US. So we need to kind of be aware of, just how mindful, the companies that are moving fast and breaking things are also being to, the greater landscape.
Yeah, I mean, Liz, earlier you mentioned that since the SVB moment, venture capital firms have been working together a bit and sharing information and thoughts on things. Has that translated over into this space, into the AI space, in terms of regulation and what people want to push for or not push for, and how the industry overall thinks about these issues?
Yeah, I think there is a lot. There certainly already had been some thought groups and information sharing among lawyers in tech, for example. And I think that has continued and picked up quite a bit. Every cohort that I'm a member of, some Slack groups, Tech GC, they all have increased the conversation around AI, and it's pretty much dominated everything that we do and talk about. I think also the events, as I mentioned, have picked up, and people are attending and taking more notes.
Yeah. I mean, Scott, and when you're investing in companies, I mean, this is a particular space where sometimes you can't quite see exactly what the risk is in front of you when you're making an investment from a legal perspective. But in some of these areas, they're kind of red flashing lights, and maybe they're going to get around them and they're going to be gigantic successes, kind of like Uber, how you described that earlier. And some of them might not. And, with obviously, a finite amount of capital to spread around, how do you think about those issues? A company that may have, here's a great image company, but is there going to be some huge copyright issue or something along those lines? How do you kind of make an assessment of one versus another and where you're going to put that capital?
I mean, listen, we try to evaluate the legal risks on these businesses when we're investing. Again, usually the risks are very theoretical, because when we're investing at the pre-seed stage or seed stage, the business doesn't really exist prior to our investment. And so, there tends to, when you're doing legal diligence, there tends to not be a lot of major red flags that show up. But then we have to obviously anticipate where there may be future risks and try to help the founders solve for those risks. If we feel like those risks are insurmountable, then we wouldn't invest in the business. If we feel like there's a very high likelihood that it will create sort of company ending risk for the business, then we probably will not be investing. I'm giving you kind of a wishy-washy answer because we haven't really had legal issues with companies that we've invested in yet where we've thought that it could be really company ending. So we just haven't experienced that much. I mean, there's certainly been some times where we've come into a deal and we've had to explore a legal risk that could be real or prospective, and we've had to lean on outside counsel to help us figure out how large the risk really was, how to quantify that risk, and that's helped us in the underwriting. But there are a lot of companies to be backing, and there's not a lot that's de-risked at the seed stage. And so if there is a meaningful amount of risk on the legal side, I'd rather just step aside and wait for the next deal to come along.
Yeah. So now turning a bit toward, younger lawyers and what things they can take away from where you guys are and skills to develop. I mean, Liz, obviously there are a lot of people out there who one day would, love the idea of being general counsel of a really fascinating venture capital fund. What are the kind of skills that you think folks should think about developing and working on in order to be positioned to be in that kind of job one day? And what are the things they should be avoiding?
Well, to give general career advice, each path is different. I think that my path was a little bit of a weird one. I actually started in entertainment prior to going to law school. So I, am sort of a recreated entrepreneur myself. And I think that sort of gave me a starting point of having more of the business questions in mind alongside the legal risks that I learned to work with and identify, during law school and then at a big firm. So I would say number one, celebrate your weirdness and use it, to your advantage. I think I spent a while in my career sort of hiding from the fact that I had that, to bring to bear, not wanting to be billed too much as an entertainment lawyer and wanting to be much more of thought of as a tech lawyer. But now I realize that, many of the lessons I learned, during that time, the art of getting things done are certainly coming in handy now, from independent film producing to, being general counsel at a venture fund, as well as, knowing a little bit more about the intersection of media and tech to be dangerous than, the average lawyer. In terms of what skills I developed, I went to law school actually thinking I would come out and continue to represent and work for my own film production company, and learned that they would not teach you all of the tricks and tips and tricks in contracts. Like during law school, you were going to actually have to come out and practice to learn all of that. So, just staying as close as I could to, what initially drove me to law school, which was deal making. And continuing to do that once I came out, and at Fenwick, certainly, getting ingrained as much as possible with the mindset of the early stage and later stage companies that I was working with and the investors. I would say that panned out, and learning what I was interested in and not. Steve, you're an awesome litigator. I learned pretty early in my legal career that was not for me, but that, transactional law was an actual, a path that I continue to find fascinating. So I'd say, really celebrating difference and finding your affinity and, nerding out in the areas that you're most drawn to, and not being afraid, to say, hey, I'm just not interested in that, but I'll learn a little. And then sort of moving on with your career path. I stayed close to early stage company work, and that, came to bear at the right time when the opportunity came up at Expa.
What can really then make you also a good GC and advisor to the partners at your fund? Because I assume that, a lot of people have different styles and approaches. I think a common criticism some lawyers get is, they're too verbose, so they're not really taking a position. Are there specific things that you think really can make a general counsel more successful than otherwise that folks should be thinking about?
Perhaps, I know that a lot of early lawyers do not have full choice of who their clients are. But if you have tough clients, celebrate that, learn from that. Thick skin can really come in handy at times. Not so much at Expa, but in terms of the path of your legal career, you're going to face people on the other side of deals or the other side of litigation, that might have different personalities from the ones that you would choose as your best friends or personal board of directors. So certainly, learning from each and every client and, trying to bring that to bear later. I guess that's what I've got.
Yeah. And Scott, there's no shortage of lawyers who dream of going onto the business side and being investors and being venture capitalists. It's a path that's hard for many people to make. Any thoughts to people that think, look, I'm working at a law firm, I'm working at another space, and this is kind of the area I want to get into. Any thoughts for those people on how they might think about that path and whether there really is how they could make that move?
Yeah, so I think one is networking. This is venture capital in particular, but business in general is very network driven. And so take the time, which is very, very tough. I know I remember being, a junior associate. You've got a lot of hours of work that get pushed your way. And so, but try to find the time and use your time outside of the office to make sure that it's highly effective at networking with a large group of people that are going to give you access to information that'll help you figure out what you're excited about and where there's opportunity. Two is stay on top of the industry that you're targeting. When I was a lawyer, I'd been an entrepreneur even before that. So I was already sort of a very keen observer of the technology market. And so anything that I would read inevitably was going to end up, bringing me back to TechCrunch and other tech publications, even while I was practicing. And so, just really stay on top of what's happening in the market, so that you can be well armed with information for those moments where you're going to have a conversation with somebody who could turn into a partner, a new employer, et cetera. At least you are in the know and you demonstrate that you really are passionate about the space. And so I think those two things are really important. Outside of that, I would say, don't wait too far into your career if you want to switch over to the business side. Or maybe let me rephrase that. I think either do it early or do it late. I think in the middle is probably where it's a little bit more difficult to make the switches over to the business side. Not that it's not doable, but I think it's just a little bit more difficult. And then expect that you're switching into a new career, and so you're gonna take some knocks from a seniority perspective. And I think going into it, accepting that both from an ego perspective as well as from a financial perspective, if you can tolerate that, right? Sometimes your life is set up in a way where it's really difficult to manage that. But if you can, then I think and you can articulate that that you're investing in building a new career. I think it'll help open the doors, because otherwise the people on the business side may just assume that you're not going to be flexible in those dimensions and that they're not going to be able to match your seniority as you're making a move into a different industry. That'd be my advice.
Those are both great pieces of advice from both of you guys. And really, this whole conversation has been fascinating and phenomenal. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. I know that the audience is going to find it incredibly valuable. Look forward to talking again soon. But for now, thank you guys so much for being a part of this.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.